Hello, I'm Larry Johnson, and welcome to a new episode brought to you by the International Unity Club and TASS. This is part of an ongoing series of dialogues, conversations with important people from both Ukraine and from Russia, where we're trying to promote understanding with the American public, where they have a chance to tell their own story, speak their own words, and we get to know them. And today I'm fortunate we got Vasily, is it Prozorov? Did I pronounce that?
Right, it's right.
Prozorov, okay.
Да.
So Vasily is an intelligence officer. You know, he and I share a common background. We work for different organizations, but we have a similar understanding of how intelligence works. And Vasily is now living in Russia, but he started his career in Ukraine with the GUR. Am I correct?
Совершенно верно.
Quite correct.
Маленькая поправка не в разведке.
There is a small correction. I can say that I worked for security, like FBI, not CIA.
Right.
I joined the Ukrainian Security Service in 1999, and I was an operative, and I mostly focused on anti-corruption and organized crime prevention and narco trafficking. Until 2014, there was a coup in 2014 in Ukraine, and I believed that it was completely illegitimate, and I believed that I had to fight against the new illegitimate government. And I decided that I would work inside my organization and cooperate with Russian special services. So I worked for 4 years, and I worked for the Russian intelligence service, being an officer with the Ukrainian Security Service Anti-Terrorist Center. In late 2017, I had to urgently escape from Ukraine. I managed to take my family along, and I saw the new year of 2018 in Moscow. And over the period of those years, when I left Ukraine, I was a colonel, and I had a dozen of various awards, and I was a communication liaison officer. I worked with other special forces, and it was I was actually a good contact for Russian intelligence. When I left when I left Ukraine as lieutenant colonel, I began exposing the Ukrainian regime. I think that there are criminals in power in Ukraine, and they are working to the detriment of Ukrainian people, and I'm exposing their crimes to the extent I'm able to do so.
Well, let's go back to when you first joined the service in 1999. When did you first become aware that the CIA was involved in working inside Ukraine and with the Ukrainian services?
Well, you know, I think basically the penetration of Western special services began immediately after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. I joined the service in 1999 when the Ukrainian security service was in air of the Ukrainian KGB service, and we inherited the screening and selection processes and other working methods, but gradually methods began to change. And while I was a security officer in Ukraine, I began noticing an increase in close contacts with Western special services, and it became very active in 2005 when Yushchenko came to power. It was the first Maidan. We are not going to focus on that, talking about whether it was legitimate or not, but Yushchenko came to power and he was pro-American, completely pro-American. His wife, Catherine Chumachenko, was a State Department employee, a U.S. State Department employee. And of course, the American side received direct access to the Ukrainian security service. And this was a very characteristic thing. When CIS officers had offices at our headquarters, they had an office where they started CVs of our agents and various documents, which was very humiliating. And another thing that is associated with penetration of American secret services into Ukraine, in the year of 2000, it happened in the year of 2007. We have an academy, a security academy, where whose cadets are trained to serve for security services. And it was the U.S. ambassador who actually handed over their graduation diplomas. Can you imagine it in any other country, that future security services officers get their diplomas, get their certificates from the hands of the U.S. ambassador? This was very humiliating. We couldn't do anything about it.
Well, also, I suspect one of the things the CIA would like to do, from the operations side, is offer training courses. Do you recall any of the training courses that they offered? And you're welcome to also comment on whether the training was any good or not, because...
Well, look here. Until the year of 2014, I used to work with those teams that focused on anti-drug trafficking. I attended a workshop that was held in Warsaw, and I did not see any influence from Western intelligence services. But after 2014, it became all-encompassing. I don't think there is a single government official in Ukraine or a single officer in security services, starting at the rank of captain and higher up, who has not been trained by the West. This was so all-embracing. This was so large-scale. I had to attend 5 or 6 different training courses starting in 2014. These were very diverse courses.
What kind of courses?
Personally, I attended a training course on information and psychological operations by NATO that were held by instructors from the Baltic Republic. They were from Lithuania, and it was done under the aegis of NATO and according to the charter, field charter of the United States. So this was the charter on information and psychological operations. I attended a course on crisis management that was held by Roger Gom, the ex-chief policeman in London. I attended a language course. I also attended a tactical medicine course that was conducted by U.S., Spanish and Poland instructors. I also attended a course on anti-mine operations, and they were conducted by U.S. instructors. I'm talking about myself. I was not an operative, a counterintelligence operative, and I was not a special unit serviceman. With your permission, I'd like to touch upon participation of Western special services, in particular American secret services, in preparation of sabotage, subversive, and terrorist units in Ukraine.
Sure, please.
In early 2015, Ukrainian troops suffered serious military defeats at Debaltsevo, Donetsk, in Luhansk, and the Ukrainian government, there were, by the way, the Minsk agreements to freeze hostilities, and the Ukrainian government realized that they would not be able to conquer Donbass and Russia using military forces. And then there was a decision made to unleash an unlimited sabotage, subversive, and information and psychological war against Donbass and Russia. This decision was implemented and put into practice at a meeting with the Ukrainian president, and there is a consultative body, and the member and all heads of security services of Ukraine are members of that committee. Poroshenko was the head of that committee. Alexander Turchinov, the head of the Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, was also there, and they adopted a document that spelled out that an unlimited subversive and terrorist and military units should start their operations in Donbass and in Luhansk and Russia, and their activities were to be disguised as criminal wars and tough wars. And there was a decision made that those groups had to be trained with participation of Western allies, and first and foremost with engagement of American experts. There were separate units set up that were supposed to conduct subversive operations, and there was the commandment of Special Operations Forces in the armed forces, and the Ukrainian Security Service created the 5th Department of Information and Intelligence, and this was a unit that had to be perform counterintelligence operations and sabotage terrorism and launching the so-called guerrilla operations in Ukraine. And these were operatives from the counterintelligence department, and Fort Bragg instructors were training them.
So it was Fort Bragg? So it means probably out of Delta Force or Special Forces.
Yes, they were special forces. This was the 75th Rangers Regiment and Green Berets.
Okay, so 75th Rangers, so they're out of Washington State. They're not at Fort Bragg. Yes, I mean, I worked with them for 23 years.
I mean that Fort Bragg had commanders, and
the John F. Kennedy
pulled the instructors.
Okay.
Besides, CIA operatives in Virginia, they have a farm, the so-called farm.
I've been there. I know it.
Well, some of Ukrainian security officers who were considered as people with high prospects, and they went to Fort Bragg and to the farm to be trained. I have to say that preparation of those high potential officers was very serious and very all-embracive, and the United States took a very responsible attitude, and they fully equipped those officers, starting from night vision gadgets of the latest generation down to knives and special watches. And Ukrainian officers who were trained there, they were complaining that their commanders were taking their watches and knives and flashlights as souvenirs from them. And so they took away those gadgets from them. And another example, they were trained by using pigs. And for a pig to survive longer, for more officers to practice, there were special injections used that were brought, drugs were brought from the United States of America. I'm talking about, fights, face-to-face fights, and actually suffocation of your opponent. And in Ukraine, there were also close contacts with Marine Navy SEALs. They even borrowed the methodology for their training as their baseline. This hellish week and then the 6-week training. And when they've initially recruited Ukrainians, Sea SEALs from Coronado were acting as instructors.
Okay. Yeah, so it looks like the whole, as I'm sure you know, there is some overlap between the Special Operations Forces, and those are different from the Special Forces. Special Forces Green Beret are not actually considered Special Operations Forces within the United States. Special Operations Forces encompass primarily Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, Task Force 160, 75th Rangers. Whereas, those are considered black top secret groups. Whereas the Special Forces were always seen, the Green Beret were seen as ones who would go in and train foreigners to engage in subversion or insurgent activity. And you'll find that when you deal with the Special Operations Forces, they're not as forthcoming about who they are and what they do. Whereas with the Special Forces, the Green Beret, they're supposed to learn how to talk your language, eat your food, live like you live. They're much more, let's call them like diplomats.
I agree with you, but speaking about not being very open who they are and where they're from, well, the Anti-Terrorist Center of Ukrainian Security was responsible for critical infrastructure, for example, nuclear plants protection, and we were conducting anti-terrorist drills on such facilities. If in 2014 there was only one representative from a foreign country in 2014. In 2017, when I attended such drills for the last time, we had about 16 representatives. 8 were from the United States, and we had a party banquet at the end, and it was very informal, and 2 strong men around 50 years old. They were a bit intoxicated, and they shared with me that one of them was not a retiree, but had just retired, but was in an operative reserve in the Navy SEALs, and the second was a major from the 70th Ranger Regiment. But they actually arrived in Ukraine under the disguise of DCRA, the Defense Department.
Yeah, it sounds like they had left military service, gone to work for the CIA, and the CIA gave them military cover. that was
Или
usually
не на
Perhaps,
ЦРУ, а
or
на разведку
maybe
Министерства
not
обороны
the
США.
CIA, but the Ministry of Defense intelligence.
it's possible, but usually when you've got that sort of diversity there, that tells me they were more likely with you know my former organization. You know, it's just they take, you know, once you have a full career in the military, you're sort of broken down. You're not as physically capable as you were when you were 20 years old, but the CIA will say, "Oh, we'll take you."
Зато он обладает колоссальным
But
опытом.
such a person has a huge experience.
Yes, no, good knowledge, good experience. Yeah, you're correct.
Кроме того,
Besides,
я должен
in addition
отметить
to
очень
that, I
активную
have to
работу в
note
этом направлении
that
вели,
there was
конечно,
a very
британские коллеги,
active effort
ваши,
on
наши,
the
и
part
инструктора
of
из
British
СС.
colleagues, ours and your colleagues.
Я считаю,
And
что это одни из
their
лучших
instructors
в мире
were one of the
специалистов, ну, после
top
наших, конечно.
worldwide. Well, of course, they
Они
ran
работали
second
также
to
в
us.
подготовке
And they
вот как раз
worked to
диверсионно-террористических
train
подразделений на Украине. Нет, были и
subversive
поляки, были и
and
прибалты,
sabotage
были
units. There were
французы, но в
Polish,
основном это американцы и британцы.
Baltic and French instructors, but mostly they were British and American.
But so let me ask you this though. There is the arrogance on the part of the West, whether it's the United States or the Brits, did you encounter the tendency that they come in and go, "We know more than you do"? And in fact, I would argue that Ukrainian intelligence officers actually probably had far more experience than the Westerners, than the U.S. or the Brits. And did any of those Western instructors actually have the humility to acknowledge that perhaps you, as Ukrainians, might have more experience in some of these areas than they did?
Приведу простой
I can
пример
give a
из
simple
личной
example
практики.
from my personal
Был у
experience.
меня хороший
I
знакомый в
had a
Украине,
good
офицер
acquaintance in
украинских
Ukraine who
десантных
was
войск.
a Ukraine
И
Marine.
он проходил курсы
And
подготовки
he
под
was
руководством британских
trained by
инструкторов. А он
British
уже до этого
instructors.
прошел
And prior
ряд
to that,
ожесточенных боев
he
на Донбассе.
fought
И вот британские
in
инструктора
Donbass.
на Яворовском
And
полигоне на Украине
British
начинают
instructors
обучать украинских
began
офицеров,
training
как
Ukrainian
им
officers
правильно
how
воевать.
to
Рассказывают
fight
нам.
correctly.
Тема была
And they were telling us,
работа на блокпосту.
well, for
То есть
example,
проверка, транспортный
how to
контроль
work
и
at
оборона
check-in
этого
points,
блокпоста. И
checking
вот они
transport control
рассказывают всё с
and
опытом
defending
афганской и иракской
check-in
кампании.
point. And they were relying on
И этот
Afghanistan
украинский
and
офицер рассказывает мне, как он на
Iraq
этом
campaigns.
семинаре,
And that
он
Ukrainian
британскому
officer
инструктору
shared with me how
задает
at that
вопрос.
workshop
Хорошо,
he
я всё
asked a
понял,
question.
вы
He
всё
said, okay,
красиво
I
говорите,
understand it.
но скажите,
You've
а
put
что
it
мне
beautifully,
делать,
but
если
could you tell me
на
what
этот
I'm supposed
блокпост
to do if the check-in
идет танковая
point
атака?
is being attacked by
И британский
tanks?
инструктор
And the British instructor
реально
actually
впал в недоумение.
was
Он не мог ответить на этот вопрос, он
embarrassed
начал
and
говорить, что
he could
этого не
not
может быть,
give
так
an
не
answer to the
бывает.
question. He said, this would be
Украинский офицер
impossible,
ему
it
в ответ
never
задал
happens
вопрос:
like that.
«Хорошо,
But
а
the
я
Ukrainian
усложню.
officer said,
А
okay,
если
I'll
перед
make it
танковой
even more
атакой мой
complicated.
блокпост
What
накрыли
if
полным
before
залпом
that
реактивной
tank
установки
attack,
«Град».
there was a shelling by Grad, by a
И британские офицеры
and the
просто
British officers
не могли ничего ответить,
could
потому что у
not
них
give
совсем другой
any
опыт. У них опыт
answer, any
контрпартизанских
informed
операций.
answer, because they
У
have
украинской
a
армии
different
сейчас,
experience,
тем
because
более, у них
they
опыт
have a
полномасштабной современной войны
counter-insurgent
на равных
operation
технологических
experience,
Right.
whereas
Поэтому
the technological
говорить о том, что Запад
levels,
может
the
чему-то сейчас
expertise
научить,
were,
нет.
and the
Я считаю,
expertise
что
were
сейчас
different.
две
And
самых
claiming that the West can
подготовленных
teach
армии в мире — это русская и
teach us
украинская.
something
Увы,
is
но это так.
not
Еще
true.
один
I
очень
think that there are
характерный
two
пример. С 2014
well-trained
года
armies in the world,
западные инструктора
the Russian
массово
army and the
внедряют в
Ukrainian
Украине
army.
стандарты тактической
Western
медицины,
instructors have been
просто
implementing
по НАТО.
the
Вы
tactical
наверняка знаете,
medicine
что это такое, в
standard
том
based
числе
on NATO
самое
standards.
простое,
You
что
must know what it is about.
в любом
And the
ранении
easiest thing is
накладывается
that
жгут или
if there
турникет для
if there is
остановки
a
крови.
wound,
Это
you
самое
have to
простое и
stop
самое
the
эффективное.
bloodshed,
Но
and
в условиях
you have
операции
to
в
dress
Афганистане
the
или
wound. wound. But in Afghanistan or Iraq, there was evacuation from battlefields, and those wounded could end up in the hands of medical professionals within 40 minutes. But when we speak about the war in Ukraine, a wounded soldier can spend 2 or 3 days or a week before he ends up on a surgeon's table. And if it is, if you spend an hour and a half in summer or a bit longer in winter, your arm, your limb will have to be amputated. And now there is a huge number of amputations because people were told that if there is a wound, they use the NATO standards instead of simply dressing the wound, and as a result, limbs are amputated. These are Western standards when straps or tunicates are used. But those instructors thought that they were superior to Ukrainians and that they would be able to tell Ukrainians what to do. These are stereotypes. And now I think that Ukrainian special forces can train anyone these days.
You know, it's sort of like, so if you grew up playing hockey, and you're a pretty good hockey player, and then here come these Westerners, and they have, you get a hockey coach who's never won a game, and he's going to teach you what? How to be a loser?
Well, but he can implement Western values.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're playing hockey, there's only one value. Put the puck in the net. Okay?
Это гол.
Yeah. Score.
Yes, it's scoring a goal. And as to the color of the club, and speaking about the brand of skates we're using, this is all secondary.
Yeah. It was like I had the chance to talk with Vyacheslav Fetisov the other day. You know, the grand old man, I don't want to call him old, but, you know, the grand old man of hockey in Russia and in Ukraine. Yeah, this tendency.
Я думаю, в мире.
And I think he is a worldwide great player.
Yeah. In fact, I told him, I said, you know, it's no offense to Sergei Lavrov and the foreign ministry. Russia's foreign ministry is great. But if Vladimir Putin's looking to send a good ambassador, a Russian ambassador to the United States, I would choose Fetisov because he's lived in the States, speaks English, and he's got the accomplishments of his hockey career. So he knows what it's like to compete. And I think he'd be an excellent representative of Russia. But that's off topic. I am fascinated by this because I've seen it. The tendency of the West, this arrogance. Oh, we know more than you, even though we haven't won a war since World War II. And we're going to teach you. And I think a significant amount of the casualties that Ukraine has incurred is because of poor Western training or inaccurate Western training.
Возможно, я с вами соглашусь.
Well, I guess I'll agree with you.
Очень много, ну, я могу говорить,
I can tell you,
я не считаю себя военным экспертом.
I'm not a military expert, but speaking about special services or special units, I can be more or less objective. There is a very strong influence of Western arrogance, and those special units in the army have also learned to be arrogant, and quite often during the special military operation, we've seen examples when army special units believe to be cooler than cucumbers. This is what their instructors have told them, and they actually they fail to comply with safety rules, or they do not use tactical methods. There were about 24 of episodes when Ukrainian subversive units landed in the Crimea. None of them had a success, and you can imagine how much time needs to be spent to train a good special unit soldier. Well, we know what their objective was, to shoot a beautiful video, but there was no military objective. People were sent to be slaughtered, and they go there. And actually, there was a very characteristic moment. I think it was in February 2024, 2024, when a group of Ukrainians with British instructors planned to land on the Tender Bay, very close to the Kherson region and Crimea. And the place where they were supposed to land, there was a group of Russian marine special units, and they were colleagues, and it was a face-to-face standoff. There were 6 people in the Russian group, and there were about 40 Ukrainians on 5 specially equipped boats, and Russians actually overwhelmed them. And actually, on the Ukrainian side, there were about 8 soldiers killed, and there were 2 boats that were destroyed, and the other 3 boats escaped. You know, this arrogance, this audacity, and this cocksure assurance leads to such negative, pitiful outcomes.
Yeah. You know, during the course of my analysis, again, without any inside knowledge, but when I looked at some of the criticism in the West about Russia's not attacking certain targets and certain headquarters elements, my thinking was always, I always assumed that Russia had intelligence assets in those places, and they're not going to risk killing intelligence assets when they're getting good information. I'm not asking you to confirm one way or the other. I was just, that's how I looked at it and said, Russia seems to have an edge from an intelligence standpoint over the West. And it's really always been that case, even going back to the Great Patriotic War, that Russian intelligence, in my view, has always been superior to that of the West. If nothing else, a little more practical, because they understand the actual costs involved.
Well, you know, Mr. Johnson, I can use my own experience, and I can rely on it only. When I was working as an agent, as a Russian agent in Ukraine, I was prohibited to develop any terrorist acts or subversive acts. The focus was on collection of information, just collecting information. It was a direct order and a direct prohibition to actually conduct any subversive actions. Though I actually looked at an opportunity of some act of sabotage or termination of a Nazi criminal, for example. But looking back, looking at what's going on in the standoff between the 2 intelligence services, I can see that this trend is still there. Russian special services are focusing on collecting important information, including information that can be used by launching a missile targeting a military asset. But the Ukrainian side has taken the path of diversive and terrorist actions that become that are useful for media and information war. For example, blowing up a railroad bridge inside Russia is a blow for infrastructure, but it would not affect the situation at the front line. And even liquidation of a government official would be a bad thing, a tragedy, but it would not affect the position of the two sides at the front line. But that allows the Ukrainian side to proclaim a victory and demonstrate the capabilities of the special forces. As you know, Ukrainians have repeatedly said that the Ukrainian security services have exceeded Mossad, Israeli Mossad.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. One thing, though, that strikes me, and I think the Westerners, when Western intelligence officers are teaching Ukrainians, they are not making it a priority to minimize or avoid civilian casualties. If anything, the instruction is there's no concern or regard for civilian casualties. Is that an accurate assessment, or?
Сопутствующие потери.
Yes, the so-called accompanying casualties.
Collateral damage.
Yeah, the collateral.
Collateral.
Yeah.
Я считаю, что вы правы.
I believe that you're right. I also believe so, because this attitude of Western instructors to Ukrainians that we are cooler, we are superior to you. Yeah. It is transformed and there is an understanding that Ukrainians are not people. You can do whatever you like. No one is going to count their losses. And in Ukrainian narrative, all Russians are treated as non-human, and it is of no relevance whether this person is Russian, is a Tatar, is from Yakutia, is a Chechen, and Ukrainians believe that they're not human, and you can treat them whatever you like. Yeah. There are no moral restrictions. If you need to kill children, you can kill children. If you need to blow up a hospital, you will do that. I've seen that starting in 2014, and with all responsibility, I can tell you that dehumanizing the population of the Russian Federation has become a norm for a long time, and it's been for a long time. It is a mandatory requirement, and Western instructors, of course, are pouring oil into that fire.
Yeah, yeah. Let's shift a little bit to the whole issue of corruption. Now, I've got my former business partner has been the recipient of whistleblower information from several Ukrainian sources. And he took that information to the U.S. government, and now the U.S. Department of Defense is actually investigating it. Recent news media reports have talked about a missing $100 million, but he's talking about $48 billion that have been stolen, routed through the Baltic states, then to bank accounts in the Caribbean. And so the current reports of corruption that we're hearing is only really the tip of the iceberg. Do you have any insights into that?
Есть, конечно. Я
Of
сам
course, I
занимался
do.
вопросами
I used
украинской
to
коррупции
deal
довольно
with Ukrainian
в разных
corruption quite
сферах.
closely
Даже
across
опубликовал
different
книгу
spheres.
об
I
украинской
even published
коррупции
a
после
book on
Майдана.
Ukrainian corruption
Я
after
должен сказать,
Maidan.
что на
I can
самом
tell you
деле,
that
я
in
думаю, что
actual fact,
никто
I believe
не
that
знает
nobody
реальных
knows the
объемов
actual
украинской
scale
коррупции.
of
Можно
Ukrainian
только
corruption.
сказать, я, как
We can
проживший
only
там,
say
видел
that
изнутри,
I,
я
as
могу
someone who
сказать,
has
что
lived in
коррупция на
Ukraine
Украине давно
and who
превратилась из
has insights, I can say
скажем,
that
криминального
corruption has been
правонарушения
transformed.
в
It used to be a crime,
основу
a
украинской
criminal
государственности.
act, but now
Это
it is the
столб, на котором
foundation, the
держится
basis, the
режим весь
pillar
украинский.
of the
Причем,
Ukrainian
опять же,
regime,
никаких
of
нравственных,
Ukrainian
моральных
governance,
ограничений нет.
and there
Причем
are
иногда
no
это даже
moral
просто нет
restrictions,
каких-то умных
and there
ходов.
are no smart
Мы можем говорить
moves
там о какой-то
even
хитроумных
observed.
схемах
We can
хищения.
speak
Можно.
about
Есть
some
и такие. А есть буквально
sophisticated
просто,
embezzlement
просто
schemes,
воруют
but
деньги, и
there
всё.
are cases
Да.
when people just
У меня было большое
blatantly
расследование.
steal money.
Фильм сняли
I
мы документальный
conducted an
о том, как
investigation and we
украинские
shoot a documentary on how
высокопоставленные
Ukrainian,
лица,
these were
офицеры,
not
там,
high-ranking
командир
people,
бригад,
these
там,
were officers,
воруют
brigade
американское
chiefs.
оружие,
They
которое
were
поставляется
stealing
на Украину, и они его
US-made
отправляли на Ближний
weapons
Восток в
and
руки
they were
Хизбалле и
sending
Хамасу.
that equipment to
Мы
Hamas
были,
and Hezbollah
я
to
выезжал
the
в Сирию в
Middle
командировку,
East.
и нам
And
удалось там
I
найти
went to Syria
джавелины,
on a business
стингеры,
trip, and
ГЛАУ
we found
британские,
javelins,
которые были
stingers,
поставлены
and
на
British-made
Украину, а
weapons that
оказались в руках
had been
Хизбаллы.
supplied to Ukraine
Там
but
даже
ended
инструкции
up
на
in the
украинском
hands
языке
of
еще были.
Hezbollah. There
Понимаете,
were
это говорит о том, что
instructions, user
никаких
manuals
ограничений
in
нет.
the
И
Ukrainian
вот
language.
западное
It
сообщество,
testifies to
я
the
уверен,
fact
оно
that
знало
there are
об
no
этом. Высшие руководители
restrictions, and I'm sure that the Western
того же
community was aware of it, and
Джо
top
Байдена.
executives
Прекрасно знали об этом.
under
Но
Joe
закрывали на это
Biden were
глаза.
fully aware of
Знаете
it,
почему?
but they were
Потому
turning a blind
что
eye.
очень много
Why? Because
американских
many American
высокопоставленных лиц
high-ranking
сами
individuals
вовлечены в эти
were
коррупционные
involved
схемы.
in those corrupt schemes.
Yeah. In fact, just let me interject. I know in this current investigation, there is a prominent Republican senator who has received, I was told, over $16 million, and a prominent Democrat senator who had received $23 million. So yeah, we like to pretend that Ukrainians are somehow more corrupt than anybody else. It's a universal.
Larry, $20 миллионов
$20 million
это
is
мелочь.
peanuts.
Yeah,
Вы знаете такого человека,
know-
Амос Хокштейн?
Amos Hochstein.
yeah.
Просто маленькая ремарка. Он
Just a
входил
brief
в
remark.
наблюдательный совет
He was a member
украинской
of the
госкорпорации
observation board of
«Нафтогаз»,
Naftogaz,
которая
a
отвечала за
Ukrainian
поставки
government-owned
газа,
corporation
за
that was
торговлю
responsible
газом
for gas
на Украине. По моим
deliveries
расчетам,
to
в период
Ukraine
только с
and gas
14
trading.
по
According to my estimates,
18
within the
год,
period from 2014 through
в этой
2018, that corporation
украли порядка 4
stole
миллиардов
about
долларов.
$4 billion.
Амос Хокштейн,
And Amos
он
Hochstein
был, грубо
was,
говоря,
roughly
наблюдателем
speaking,
от
an
Демократической
observer
партии
from the
США в этой
Democratic
корпорации.
Party
Он
in that
лоббировал
Ukraine.
интересы этой
He was
корпорации,
lobbying the
лоббировал,
interests of that
курировал
corporation, and
коррупционные
he was
схемы. Как
in
вы думаете,
charge of
сколько он
corruption
заработал
schemes.
на этих коррупционных
What do
схемах?
you think? How much did
Yeah.
he earn?
А если вот сейчас
And
на
if,
на Украине скандал
well,
с
there's
коррупцией в
an ongoing
энергоатоме, это тоже
corruption at
госкорпорация, которая
Energoatom.
отвечает за атомную энергетику
It
на
is a
Украине.
government corporation
Так вот,
responsible for nuclear energy in
наверняка вы
Ukraine.
знаете,
And
что с
you know for
2014
sure
года
that starting in 2014,
американская, ну уже американо-японская, наверное,
American and
корпорация
Japanese
Westinghouse
corporation,
активнейшим
Westinghouse,
образом
has
работает
been
на Украине.
active in
Фактически она
Ukraine.
взяла под контроль
And
весь
basically it
рынок
has
ядерной
seized
энергетики,
control of
всю
the
отрасль
nuclear
ядерной энергетики
energy
Украины.
market and the
А
entire
лоббировала
industry in
Украине
Ukraine. And the
Westinghouse на
lobbyist
Украину
of its
Демократическая партия
penetration
США,
was the
вплоть до
Democratic
госпожи
Party
Хиллари
of the
Клинтон.
United States,
там
including
хищение
Mrs. Hillary
коррупционных схем
Clinton.
тоже
And there were
$миллиарды.
billions of
Я вот в
dollars
связи с этим думаю,
stolen.
что
There were
современный
big
вот этот
embezzlements.
коррупционный скандал,
And I
который
believe
идет на
that the
Украине,
ongoing
кроме
corruption
того, что это,
scandal in
конечно,
Ukraine,
очень сильный
in
рычаг
addition
давления на
to
администрацию Зеленского,
using it as a strong
республиканской
leverage
партии
against the
США и лично
Zelensky
для Дональда
administration,
Трампа это хорошая
the
возможность
US
нанести удар по
Republican
своим
Party
конкурентам из
and Donald
Демократической партии.
Trump
Это их
have a
финансовые
good
потоки.
chance to
И
hit a
этим
blow
скандалом эти
against
финансовые
the
потоки
competitors, against the Democratic Party. Those financial
Возможно.
flows
Это только сугубо мое
could be
личное мнение.
closed. This is my private opinion.
Yeah, of course, I don't discount the possibility that there are also Republicans there, feeding at the trough like a pig, taking advantage of it. It's sort of a bipartisan goal. Like with respect to, I don't know if you have any, memories about Burisma. So there's Hunter Biden, the son of vice president, but the one that hasn't gotten much attention was Cofer Black. Cofer was a CIA officer. Then he went to State Department as the coordinator for counterterrorism, was the head of the office I used to work with. And then all of a sudden he winds up on the board of Burisma as well as on the board of a Baltic bank. I personally don't believe in coincidence. And I think that there were some elements of corruption in that.
Some elements is very mildly put. Well, the simplest thing is that Burisma received a mineral production license, a mineral extraction license in a priority regime. There was a green light given to it to work in Ukraine, and the income of that corporation was very high. And all these operations were actually, the oversight was exercised by former CIA officers and the President of Poland. Do you remember the scandal when there was an attempt to initiate a criminal investigation of Burisma, and Biden insisted on having the Ukrainian prosecutor general fired? And this was so unceremoniously done. It was done so shamelessly that there is nothing to be said about it. They treated Ukraine as a colony. We can do with our colony whatever we want. Burisma, yes. We have hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars lost in corruption.
Yeah. Well, let me close. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Let me close with this and get your opinion. Right now, it looks like, on average, Ukrainians are suffering around 1,300, 1,400 casualties per day. So over a month, that's about 40,000 casualties in a month. In addition, the people are going AWOL, abandoning their posts to the tune of, I've seen 20,000 a month and as many as 40,000 a month. So let's go with the lower total. That means in total right now, Ukraine is bleeding 60,000 people per month. The last recruitment numbers I saw were somewhere they were able to recruit around 25,000 a month. I'm not great at math, but I can figure out that is an unsustainable loss. And that I think the reports that are coming out now about the corruption combined with those losses indicate Ukraine's days are numbered in terms of being able to continue to fight. Do you think I'm being overly optimistic?
I think you are somewhat optimistic because they have enough people in Ukraine. In terms of manpower, they have mobilization reserves. They can recruit people from the streets. And please do not forget this opportunity to replenish the Ukrainian army using foreign mercenaries. And we are observing an increase in their headcount, especially mercenaries from Latin America. I don't think that Ukraine is living its last days, though it would be stupid to deny the problems. And actually, things are very difficult if we are talking about manpower on the battlefield. But the war is highly technological now, and Ukraine is more or less all right. it is the infantry problem, but drones and technology. And it is not the headcount, the infantry headcount, but the number of operators of Ukrainian drones. We are coping with them, but not so successfully as we'd like to. And in terms of drones, Ukraine is one of the global leaders, and it's stupid to deny it.
Right, no, I don't deny that. But I also look at just recruiting somebody off the street doesn't mean they're trained. And as you know, training anybody for military operations, minimum of 3 months. And with the advent of the drones and the greater technology, you're looking at more like a 6-month training regimen. And I don't see Ukraine as having the training infrastructure in place. If for no other reason, there's not a single safe place in Ukraine that Russia cannot hit.
You're right, but they can start training the people in Poland on training grounds in Germany, and they can actually send untrained soldiers to fight, and they can actually ask foreign countries to extradite Ukrainian men back to Ukraine. There are well-trained Ukrainian units that are spared, and their losses are minimal. And they can afford to train new recruits, ensuring high quality of training. And there's infantry that is used to plug holes, and they send people to fight after 3 days of training, just to make sure that the Russian offensive is stopped. And I witnessed that in Severodonetsk, in Lysychansk, and Rubezhne, when our army was attacking, and there was a threat that the Ukrainian army would be surrounded, and they sent Belarus and Georgian mercenaries just to stop our units for a few hours. All of them were killed. All Georgians were killed. There were 2 Belarusians as prisoners of war. I talked to them, and this is the attitude of the Ukrainian leadership. And you are not supposed to spare lives. You can send people to fight. They have other cannon fodder to be sent to fight. Unfortunately, it is so. Ukraine is a big country, and the population is still there, and they have people to recruit, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there are people who can fight until the last Ukrainian man is killed.
Yeah, it's awful. Well, Vasily, we are out of time. Thank you, my friend. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Мне было очень приятно.
It was a big pleasure for me.